The year 2025 dawned, casting a somber light over a Middle East already simmering with tension and uncertainty. As the first rays of sun broke through the haze, the world sensed that something irreversible was about to unfold. Across the region, cities braced for impact. Streets once bustling with daily life now echoed with anxiety, as families hurried indoors and soldiers took up positions along volatile borders. The shadow war between Israel and Iran, long fought in the shadows through proxies and covert operations, had finally erupted into open conflict. Years of escalating provocations and clandestine attacks had reached a breaking point. In 2024, Israel unleashed a barrage of missiles and assassinate Iranian officials in Syria and hitting Iranian embassy hoping to shift the balance. But Iran's response was swift and devastating, targeting key military sites and exposing Tel Aviv's vulnerabilities to the world. This was no longer a proxy war, it was a direct, state-on-state confrontation, with armies clashing openly and the threat of escalation looming over every border. The world watched anxiously as Washington under President Trump signaled its readiness to intervene. B-2 bombers were deployed, military convoys rumbled through the desert, and command centers buzzed with urgent activity. The specter of American involvement added a new layer of unpredictability. Oil prices surged overnight, sending shockwaves through global markets. Leaders from Europe to Asia scrambled to prepare for the fallout, knowing that the world's energy lifeline was now at risk. Israeli and Iranian leaders framed the conflict as existential, each vowing victory and rallying their people with fiery rhetoric. The stakes had never been higher. Around the globe, anxious crowds gathered around screens, watching the crisis unfold in real time. The question was no longer if war would erupt, but when and how far it would spread beyond the region. The region's fragile stability was shattered. Cities lay in ruins, civilians fled their homes, and the world braced for a conflict that threatened to redraw the global order and upend decades of fragile peace. In war rooms and government offices, strategists and leaders faced impossible choices. The stage was set for a war, with consequences no one could fully control, and the world held its breath, waiting for what would come next. Iran has long been at the center of American and Israeli fears, a nation whose nuclear ambitions and regional influence threaten the balance of power. Its uranium enrichment brought it close to a nuclear weapon, an existential threat for Israel. Iran's network of proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, militias in Iraq and Syria, projected power and destabilized the region. Control over the Strait of Hormuz gave Iran leverage over global oil supplies, making it a threat to the world economy. For the US, containing Iran was about protecting energy flows and maintaining dominance, and ultimately, the whole Middle East. The regime's anti-Western ideology, rooted in the 1979 revolution, fueled decades of hostility. By 2025, Washington and Jerusalem saw containment as futile. Only direct action could neutralize the threat. The world was about to witness the consequences of that decision. The attack was sudden and overwhelming. On June 15, 2025, Israel launched Operation Jericho. Stealth fighters struck Iran's nuclear sites at Natanz and Fordo, with US-supplied bunker busters, refueling their F-35 by Western air forces in Iraq. Simultaneously, Israeli cyber teams crippled Iran's command networks, blinding air defenses and sowing chaos. Follow-up waves targeted IRGC bases, missile sites, and the homes of top commanders. Israeli intelligence ensured every strike hit its mark, leaving Iran's military reeling. Tehran was stunned, its retaliatory capabilities shattered before they could be used. Panic spread as the regime struggled to assess the damage. Israel's message was clear: nowhere was safe. The operation didn't seek conquest but to break Iran's sword and shield. The world held its breath, knowing the next move would come from Washington. The stage was set for American intervention. In the wake of Israel's strikes, all eyes turned to Washington. The world held its breath, waiting to see how the United States would respond to the rapidly escalating crisis. Tensions ran high as speculation swirled across newsrooms and living rooms alike, with many fearing that a single misstep could ignite a much larger conflict. President Trump addressed the nation in a somber, urgent tone, framing the attack as a necessary defense against an outlaw regime on the brink of nuclear capability. He spoke of the grave threat posed by Iran, emphasizing the need for decisive action to protect American interests and allies in the region. The president's words were carefully chosen, designed to rally support both at home and abroad. Declassified intelligence was presented as proof of Iran's intent to build and use a bomb. Officials displayed satellite images and intercepted communications, painting a picture of imminent danger. The evidence, they claimed, left no room for doubt. Action was not just justified, but imperative. The White House warned of a power vacuum in Iran, raising fears of weapons of mass destruction falling into rogue hands. Security advisors cautioned that instability could spread beyond Iran's borders, threatening the entire region and potentially drawing in other world powers. Humanitarian concerns were invoked. Reports of chaos and brutal crackdowns inside Iran flooded the airwaves. Images of terrified civilians and desperate families underscored the urgency of the situation, as the administration argued that intervention was also a moral imperative. The mission, Trump insisted, was liberation and stabilization, not conquest. He promised that American forces would act with restraint and purpose, aiming to restore order and support the Iranian people in their struggle for freedom. Behind the rhetoric, the opportunity was clear. Iran's defenses were down, its leadership in disarray. The chaos presented a rare opening for the U.S. to reshape the balance of power in the Middle East, and policymakers in Washington were quick to recognize the stakes. U.S. forces were already in position, awaiting the order. Troops stood ready at the border, military hardware was mobilized, and the world watched as the machinery of war prepared to move. The narrative was set, the justification complete. Every detail had been orchestrated to build a case for intervention, leaving little room for dissent or hesitation. The world understood, the invasion was inevitable. Allies and adversaries alike braced for the consequences, knowing that the coming days would shape the future of the region for years to come. The countdown to war had begun, and there was no turning back. Operation Persian Freedom began with overwhelming force. U.S. armored divisions surged from Iraq, targeting Khuzestan and the city of Avaz. Air superiority was total. A-10S and Apaches cleared the way for ground forces. Special forces and paratroopers struck from Afghanistan, disrupting supply lines and linking with dissidents. Marines landed near Bandar Abbas, aiming to seize the Strait of Hormuz. Major cities fell quickly. The Iranian army collapsed, surrendering in droves. U.S. technology and speed seemed unstoppable. But beneath the surface, the IRGC and basage melted into the population, preparing for guerrilla war. The easy victories were over. The real fight was about to begin. The invasion's hardest days still lay ahead. The illusion of a quick victory vanished almost overnight as Iran's insurgency erupted with a ferocity few had anticipated. What began as a conventional conflict quickly transformed into a shadow war, where the rules were rewritten and the enemy was everywhere, yet nowhere. The IRGC, drawing on years of asymmetric warfare experience, unleashed a relentless campaign of sophisticated IEDs and well-coordinated ambushes. U.S. patrols, once confident in their armor and training, now faced devastating losses and constant anxiety, never knowing when the next explosion would shatter the uneasy calm. Swarms of explosive-laden drones, both homemade and imported, harassed convoys and bases day and night. These silent killers could strike from above at any moment, making every movement a gamble and every outpost a potential target. In the Persian Gulf, Iranian speedboats darted between massive oil tankers, while Houthi missiles guided by Iranian intelligence targeted shipping lanes. The resulting chaos sent shockwaves through global trade, driving up prices and sowing uncertainty far beyond the battlefield. The regime, battered but unbroken, called for national resistance. Propaganda flooded the airwaves, and soon, much of the population rallied against the occupiers, turning city streets and rural villages alike into battlegrounds of defiance. American troops, once greeted by some as liberators, now found themselves isolated and surrounded by hostility. Every patrol was a test of nerves, every checkpoint a potential flashpoint for violence. The lines between civilian and combatant blurred beyond recognition. Insurgents melted into crowds, striking without warning and vanishing just as quickly, fueling a relentless cycle of violence and reprisal that seemed impossible to break. Iran's vast, unforgiving terrain, mountains, deserts, and labyrinthine cities, became a natural fortress. Fierce nationalism and a deep sense of identity made occupation a nightmare for any foreign force. The U.S. military controlled the cities and highways, projecting power where it could. But the countryside and the hearts and minds of many Iranians remained stubbornly out of reach, resisting every attempt at pacification. The war had toppled a regime, but in its place, it had unleashed a nation's fury, an unending storm of resistance, chaos, and the bitter cost of occupation. The invasion sent shockwaves worldwide, fracturing alliances and fueling new rivalries. Russia and China condemned the US, covertly arming the Iranian resistance and prolonging the conflict. Europe was divided, some backed America, others warned of disaster and protested in the streets. Middle Eastern allies were torn between relief at Iran's weakness and fear of regional chaos. Iranian proxies struck back, threatening oil infrastructure and regional stability. The UN was paralyzed by great power vetoes, unable to stop the war. Diplomacy failed, the world slid into a new era of instability and proxy conflict. The war in Iran became a global crisis with no end in sight. The war's most immediate impact was the collapse of the global energy market. Despite US control of Khuzestan, sabotage made oil exports impossible. Iranian proxies attacked tankers and pipelines, crippling the flow of oil from the Gulf. Oil prices soared past $200 a barrel, triggering economic shockwaves worldwide. Gas prices tripled, inflation soared, and industries reliant on cheap energy faltered. Strategic reserves offered only temporary relief. The crisis plunged the world into a deep recession. Markets crashed, unemployment soared, and unrest spread. Governments fell as citizens rioted over soaring costs and shortages. Globalization unraveled as nations hoarded resources and closed borders. The war's economic fallout touched every household, exposing the world's vulnerability. The conflict in Iran had become everyone's crisis. Years later, the dream of a stable Iran was dead, replaced by endless insurgency and chaos. American forces were trapped in a quagmire, casualties mounting with no victory in sight. The war's justification, preventing catastrophe, had become a bitter irony. The conflict created a humanitarian disaster and a shattered economy. The global recession lingered, industries collapsed, and poverty soared. The cost, trillions of dollars and countless lives, hollowed out America and scarred a generation. Iran was left in ruins, its people traumatized and its future stolen. Sectarian violence and power vacuums fueled endless conflict across the region. The invasion stood as a warning. Military power cannot remake the world without unleashing chaos. The scars of the war would haunt the world for generations, a lesson in the dangers of hubris and the limits of force.